I just want to hop on here quickly and film a content warning for this episode. My guest, Adi, and I, we will be talking about trauma, childhood trauma in particular, and Adi will be sharing from her own story of abuse that she experienced, particularly sexual abuse, and it's handled with grace, and it's not detailed or graphic. So I want you to take care of yourself as you listen, if you listen, and just know that I think Adi's story is worth listening to, and I hope that you feel seen and heard in her story. But I think that many of us will be able to relate to what she has experienced. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not bad. I am a person who was really hurt, and I did what I could to survive, and I caused hurt too. And so I've done what I can to repair. I think that some of the work I get to do in this is working toward repair in this world where people hurt each other.
Okay. 1, 2, ready, go.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dig into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, you know, the stuff that makes good church folks squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holy trouble we get into today.
Hi, Adi.
Hi, Mariah.
Welcome to Called to Be Bad.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. So this is Adi or Adria Tilford, and we grew up going to the same church. I was an infant baby when we first met, and Adi was like a teenager. Like I always like looked at you and your sister, and like the Sarahs is like the older, like cool people, and
we were pretty cool.
I was just the babe. Just the baby.
Coveted baby. So we all wanted to hold and play with and babysit. Yes.
Oh, you know. So Adi Tilford is an adoptive mom, educator, writer, and speaker who is learning to love herself and embrace her story in the second quarter of life. Saying yes to a new adventure in ministry, Adi is writing and speaking about learning to trust in the therapeutic love of Jesus. This includes a commitment to prayer, play, and self-care as a therapeutic parent and educator, as well as her journey of healing from early life trauma. Adi is a longtime educator who specializes in coaching professional development around trauma-informed practices. She hosts the 8,000 Promises podcast, woohoo! Saying yes to God's promises for your one beautiful life, writes the 8,000 Promises blog, and is writing her first book. That's on my bucket list. Definitely want to write a book at some point. So today we are going to be talking about childhood trauma and how that affects your faith, how that affects every part of your life. But before we get into that, I'm curious, Adi, what you are drinking today.
Okay, well, I have some chai rooibos.
I don't know if that's how you say it.
I'm making it up. Tea, it's decaffeinated. And I put in my Philly mug. I lived in Philadelphia the first year after college, 19 years ago. I was like doing the math. 19 years ago.
Okay.
And my first job was working at a school for kids who had been expelled from public school. And so it was a big introduction into trauma-informed education. That is why I picked this mug.
Yes.
What about you? What are you drinking, girl?
Well, shout out to Alex and Amanda, my sister and brother-in-law, who also live in Philly. So we have good. Philly's like one of the highest cities as far as people who listen to podcasts. So sending some love to the, what is it? The City of Love? No.
Brotherly Love.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah. Brother. Yeah. That one. Sorry.
It even says it in my mug. Can you see that?
City of Brotherly Love. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm drinking a spiced tea blend from my mother-in-law. She gave us all this tea blend for Christmas, which is an excellent Christmas gift. And I have it in my, we'll see if I can turn it. It's very full. In my Glenwood Mennonite Church mug in honor of our church roots, our common church roots.
Hello, beloved baddies. A quick break to tell you that this episode is sponsored by the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul, a nonprofit that supports and amplifies the voices of edgewalkers through art that catalyzes change, laughter that brings us together, and soul awakening to the creative spark within us. The support from the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul has meant the world to this podcast. So I highly encourage you to check out their website, arthumorandsoul.com, to see their other featured artists and projects. If you want to support the podcast, you can check out our Patreon or get in touch.
So, we'll be talking about trauma, and I'm curious, how you use that word, and doesn't have to be the perfect definition, but how you use the word trauma and how we'll be using it in this conversation today.
Yeah, I appreciate that you want to define that, because I actually think trauma is a word that turns a lot of people off. They don't want to think about the hardest parts of people's stories, or their own. Truly, usually their own. It's the hardest. I looked up one of my favorite go-to guys. His name's Brian Post, and I do have an episode with him on 8,000 Promises. It's pretty great. But he says that trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. And so ultimately, I think that trauma and chronic stress are equally interchangeable. Yeah. And so there's two different concepts, and this is maybe a little too concepty, but there's big T trauma. That's a major event where you could name and describe the one event. It might have little parts in it, but it's one event. And then there's little T trauma that is ongoing stressors that don't end. That's that prolonged piece that overwhelm your system. And when you're little, your system doesn't have much in place to keep it from being overwhelmed. So the older we get, the more our system develops, our nervous system and our ability to regulate, because we've had experience with that. The more developed it gets, the more we can handle things that come to us. And so that's sort of the idea. Then there's also big T traumas that happen repeatedly. When we think of abuse that is ongoing, that would be big T's that happen again and again, like physical abuse or sexual abuse. Okay. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Yeah. Often their automatic go-to is I haven't experienced trauma. I haven't, because we think of trauma as going to war and having PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, not the little T stressors or chronic stress, something that is ongoing, that is overwhelming.
Yeah. And it's both of those things. And I think one thing I really appreciate about Brian Post and Karen Purvis and Bruce Perry, some of the lead names in neuroscience, that they are really, and I'm right now in a class called Neurosequential Model of Education, where Bruce Perry is teaching a lot about how to apply some of the neuroscience to education. But so often we have a lot of diagnoses, mental health diagnoses, that really, when you get down into the root causes around early life trauma, the biological and nervous system shifts that happen because of the body's responses to those events that were overwhelming and unpredictable. The body has to shift and mold to those events. And then we diagnose people or children with different diagnoses. And oftentimes they're actually trauma related. And he would say, and I fully agree, it's actually complex trauma or complex post-traumatic stress disorder that's happening in childhood, but we label it oppositional defiance or ADHD or OCD. I mean, it can be a lot of different things, and not that that's always, because sometimes those diagnoses might make sense, but Bruce Perry would argue that we are often misdiagnosing when it's actually post-traumatic stress disorder that children are experiencing.
So, like, and you might not know the answer to this, but I'm just like curious, like, how would like a therapist or psychiatrist or psychologist like parse apart what is like, because this is making me think like, like I wonder if I have ADHD. I have, taken medicine for anxiety and depression. Like, oh, what if that is tied to like trauma? What if it's part of like a trauma response or um complex trauma? What did you call it? CP?
It's complex trauma is what a lot of people
Okay.
call it, or complex,
Okay.
like, it just means basically that it happened when you were young, and so it changed how it makes you neurodiverse, right? Like that you're not going to fit into because your nervous system is now sensitized to environmental
Yeah.
stressors. It's all,
Yeah.
but basically,
Is there like
go ahead.
sorry. Well, I was going to ask, is there like an age cutoff for when like your body is more able to handle those stressors, or like your brain is formed enough that it wouldn't like reshape how your brain is forming? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like when does childhood or like early development, like when is that cut off?
So each part of the brain has sort of a different time frame when it's developing. So like your foundational part of the brain, the brainstem, is forming when you are in the womb.
Okay.
That's going to be all of your survival responses. That's like the things that will make it so you can live when you are born. Those are all developed in utero. And then like that midbrain, there's like a couple parts of the midbrain, but they're developing in early childhood where they're like before you get into school. And so that's a lot of your, the things that you experience that you don't necessarily have language to, but creates memory. And so it's also not completely tied to emotion, but it's like what's coming in. So those sensory experiences. And then the next part of and it's all kind of going, I'm not a neuroscientist, so if I am getting any of this wrong, my bad. Yeah. And please read Bruce Perry or Dr. Purvis or Brian Post. They really do have all of the but this is,
we'll link resources. Yeah.
But basically, as you get older, so they say the female brain kind of fully develops at 24 to 25. There's different studies are coming out with new things all the time. That's the other piece with brain science is like it is on fire. They're learning more and more and more all the time. And I really want to emphasize that because my parents had zero of this information. They had zero of this. It was not around. Like the last 20 years have been the decades of brain science. So my parents, in all of the conversation that we'll have, any of our parents in the 80s, like our parents didn't know, and they were doing the best they could with what they did have and what they did know. And I just always want to offer that grace to them, and like that I really see and understand that. And also we do know now. So we really need, as anybody in caregiving professions, we need to do the best we can with learning how it all works. So anyway,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the male brain then is like 27-ish. That they say. Okay. But even with that, we still have neuroplasticity. We still are able to change pathways, but it just gets harder the deeper our patterns and pathways go.
Yeah. So let's get into your story and share what you want to, what feels comfortable to you, and I'm curious how, like, through sharing your story, like how your childhood trauma is still affecting you and how it affects your faith, those kind of layers to it. But we can start with your story.
Yeah. So I always get this is how it affects me. I don't ever know where to start, but I think I would just start with that piece. The in utero piece has been really helpful for me to understand. My initial trauma was a big T trauma, and I actually went through it in the womb. My sister died in an accidental drowning when she was 18 months old. And so I was with my mom, obviously developing. She was 4 months pregnant with me.
Wow.
When the accident happened, my mom was the person who found my sister. And I know this is so sad, but what's interesting is for a lot of my life, until very recently, I would tell that story and not feel sad. I would tell that story and it was like a block. Like why are people sad when I talk about this? I don't understand. Yeah. And so that's been this grief work that I've worked on in the last 4 years has really allowed me to understand that is so sad and dig into why I did have a block, but it was, that's a survival mechanism, but also.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just, it all happened when I was developing. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about those parts of the brain that were in utero, like that, ultimately, one of the things that's been really helpful for me in Bruce Perry's book, What Happened to You? It's a book with Oprah. They talk a lot about disassociation, and one of the counselors that our family has worked with explained disassociation to me before I read that book, in that when a baby is in the womb and they are being exposed to all of the neurochemicals that the mother is experiencing, so all of the stress hormones, all of the grief, anything that was produced in that setting, a baby doesn't have any of the equipment to manage that or handle it. And it feels like an onslaught to the baby, the developing baby. And so the only defense mechanism a baby has is to disassociate. They can't fight, they can't flight, they can't even freezing, but none of it works to make it go away. So the only thing they can do is separate. So when if we want to talk about how that impacts my life, disassociation was my go-to. And so if something got hard or stressful, it was very easy for me just to check out. I did that in some ways that were very celebrated, like my nose in a book, right? So like if things are stressful or crazy, like I'm reading, but that also meant I was pretty disconnected from myself, right? Yeah. Right from the beginning. Yeah. And I look at it now and I'm like, and I love, because Oprah, she talks about it in the book, and it really was like, it actually gave her a lot of the gifts that she has, like her vocabulary, her ability to have an intense focus on something. I mean, I'm like, oh yeah, I get that.
Interesting.
There are gifts that have come.
So there are gifts that come with disassociation or with some of your coping mechanisms, whatever they may be. Huh.
But then there are challenges also, because when your baby needs you, and that feels stressful, and you want to check out, or you want them to stop needing you, that's not good, right? Like they're talking about good or whatever. So that I think is one of the big challenges that I didn't understand for so long. And I'm grateful to understand it now, because I can really work on presence and keeping myself connected. And because I want to be connected, but I can also understand when I need that disconnect, like when that's happening, that I have other tools now to help get myself regulated. And those are tools I've had to really spend time building. So that's the foundational trauma. And usually they say if you can discover your foundational trauma, then usually the healing that comes through working through that can really help you with your other ones. But then when I'm just going to breathe for a second.
Yeah.
So when I was about 6, someone in trust began to sexually abuse me. And that happened over several years in my life. And I actually have thought often, and I haven't really spoken about this, but if that disassociation stress response actually made me a more likely victim for abuse, because I disassociated when the harm started to happen, right? And then also I was disconnected. So I didn't go to somebody else with that.
But I mean,
just in that, maybe, I don't know, just being somebody.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't have maybe registered this as danger because you could disassociate, but maybe like your primer, like that you were primed for disassociation got you through.
I'm sure it did. Like, I'm sure that it was like the both and of that.
Yeah.
Where you say like, oh, well, I didn't speak up. I was a go along with everything person, right? Like, so those behaviors that.
Because you had to be from before you were born.
Yeah.
It would be too much.
Right. And I think that's the other piece that I've talked a lot with my parents about, my family, just the grief that was in our home. Yeah. Understandably, right? But then I was that baby, which also like speaks to like when my baby was needing me and I didn't know what to do, because when I was a baby and needed, there were times I think that the grief maybe blocked the ability to care. And I just want to say that with all the grace and love to my parents. Because I don't even know. I mean, I have a taste of how that kind of an event can shut you down, and not at the level that they had. But obviously I have a full experience of it as the baby, but as a mom,
I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that like once you have that, like once you've experienced like big T trauma or like ongoing little T trauma, your brain interprets new stimulation as danger, or like it lights up your system in a way that even if it's not logical, like even if you're like, okay, this is not actually putting me in danger, your body still, your nervous system is still upset. So like a baby crying, if you're experiencing trauma, like even if it's a neutral or unpleasant stimulus, like could put you in fight, flight, or freeze, and then that would bring up, is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like also making just the distinction that it's unprocessed trauma that used to do that. So
it's not integrated, not
integrated. Yeah. So I can still have moments where baby crying will trigger me, will like make me go into that fight, flight, freeze. But I also now, because I have done a lot more integration, I also can hold. It's amazing the night and day difference of what I can hold for my own children, because I have spent so much time in my own grief work, in my own processing and integration. I'm still not there. Like, I still definitely have work to do, but I have come so far. I want to celebrate. Like, I have come so far. And
then what a gift to your children that you can model how to care for yourself, how to heal and walk, because we're all going to experience, adversity and harm, whether it's, registered as trauma or not.
Right. I think the other part that has really become clear to me about my story and some trauma is that when I was in 7th grade, the abuse had stopped happening. And I don't even know like how I thought about, like, I'm like, I don't really know what I have as a before thought of that, but our middle school, like, had, the purity culture, true love waits group of people come in, and they did like this ceremony where they like pulled roses petals off, and they were like, every time you are like having sex with someone like this, and then they were like at the end, like, here's this dead stick, this is you. But like for a that's a terrible message for any girl to hear, any child,
anybody,
right? Like, nobody should hear that they're one, that they could be like made into something dead and trash, like so simply. But in addition, like, for a child who has abuse, and this is like, I had to do a lot of work with my counselor around this, of just like how that message itself was like so compounding of the trauma. And there is a distinct memory for me in 7th grade when that message, having that, I got really sick, like missed a lot of school. My self-esteem was just like, which is like a hard time of year for our life for most kids, but just there's such a distinct like before and after of that. And then like deciding, well, I don't know how my faith played into this. I'm exploring this a little bit, but like this idea of like Jesus makes us clean and what, like born again virgin and blah, 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 all of this stuff that was part of that. Of just being like, okay, well now I can act like nothing's ever happened to me. And that's how you should act. Like you're wiped clean means you should be wiped clean. Like, and so that's just, I mean, there's been so much harm that came through that message too. And like when you and where I were talking about like all of your parts being known by God, but then that message was like, but those parts aren't wanted by God. Those parts are, I guess, as a 13-year-old, that's like how that's not wanted by God. And so that must not be wanted by anyone. And so I've got to be perfect. And so I just really worked on making sure that it looked like nothing had ever happened to me, which is very stressful. And so what did I want to do? Disassociate. So how did I do that? I started getting drunk. I started to get so drunk I didn't remember what happened at parties. Like, and then what does it do? It compounds, right? And so that is all work then that I didn't get to start working on until in my 30s when it was like a big rupture. Thank goodness that has allowed me to get some really incredible help. And I think to find a reconnection with a God who loves me, all of me, who was like, who has cried with me about this story. Like, I mean, I didn't tell you this, but I begged God never to talk about this part of my story. Like I said, God, I will write, I will do whatever you want. Just like, I don't ever want to talk about that. And to have that be in the last year where God's like, you don't have to. Like, I have felt very certain that I do not have to do that, but that it's where a need is, you know, that there's a need for people. And I'm like, well, yeah, if 1 in 4 women is sexually assaulted before the age of 18. Yeah. Like we aren't hearing, that's not being talked about in our churches. That's not being talked about in our, like 1 in 4, that is like, that's so many women, you know, and we're walking around acting like nothing's ever happened to us. And not that we have to be like,
and sometimes that happens in church. And then we hear messages of like purity culture and sin, and, you know, we're taught to feel shame when we're also getting this message of like, you know, come to the church and, you know, wash it all away. And as it's supposed to be a safe place, but it's the source of the violence. And
and then the other, I think, challenging Christian message that I've really wrestled with is the one around forgiveness. And I have been in like a hot wrestle with God around, like, because I would like to experience that. And I remember being in my late teens and like being like, I forgive. It's all like God. And really thinking that until then I like have to tell a boy I'm dating that I have this history, that a boy I want to marry. And then it's like, boom. Or we're going through infertility and I have to have a doctor poking and prodding in all of my places. And, you know, like just, it comes up over, and that's, I think, that complex piece, because it doesn't go away because you're a grown up. And I think so often it's like, well, why are adults acting this way or that way? And I'm like, well, adults who were traumatized children don't magically turn into adults who are healthy
without that.
Like they just become bigger people with the same hard things. And at some point your coping skills stop working the way they did when you were little and you were just surviving, you know, and it makes life more challenging. And so I think that I don't know how to say it doesn't impact me. I have to be like super intentional to make sure I don't let it hijack my life. You know, I have to. So anyway, the forgiveness piece of just, what does that mean? But I think I've really kind of come to like, forgiveness is not I mean, and I've heard this lots of places. Well, it's not about saying something was okay or right. I mean, I think I've heard that a lot more.
100%.
Or that it didn't happen.
Right.
But just that you're not going to be the one who's in charge of punishing the person. And I was like, I like that. I can.
And forgiveness does. Go ahead.
No, just it's about me letting God be the one who is doing that work with the person who hurt me. I don't have to.
Right.
But I can hold a boundary and I can feel all of the things I felt about it. And I'm still working on that. I don't think I'm there with.
And forgiveness doesn't mean, like what you were saying with holding boundaries, that you need to be in relationship with this person or that you need to be reconciled with this person. And there's probably a forgiveness piece of forgiving little you for not knowing any better and not being able to advocate for herself and not being able to stop it. And that's what's hard about a lot of those purity culture messages, is because they put there's like a lot of victim blaming. And that's just,
Yeah. And it was like a Instagram post or something like that mentioned something about just recognizing this one is hard, but it was one of those moments where I was like, that is it, that you carry around this idea that you should have told someone when you find out that this is what happened to you and then you didn't tell someone. You carry this around. But then I think you think like there are all kinds of signs that something is wrong. Like when a child is sick for months, that is a sign, and I don't think my parents weren't ignoring it. Like they were trying to get me healthy, but that wasn't a sign that was like connected to like some other processing thing or mental health. Because like I do think there was like a different pool of information available, like not even understanding how somatic and psychological and are so intertwined, right? But still, what were the things? And I think this is what it made me think. I wanted to say this. Like, if a child comes to you and says, so-and-so is mean, those are things I would say. So-and-so is mean. Like, we can say, oh, no, they're not. Or we can say, oh, boys will be boys, or, oh, big sisters are like that, or whatever. Or girls are just mean, or whatever. Or we can say, tell me more about that. Yeah. What is that? What does mean to you? What does it mean when they're mean? Or because a little child doesn't actually always have words for what's going on or what's being done to them. And I think about that. It gave me this point of like, okay, that's important that we just know if a child comes to you and says, so-and-so is this. Yeah. We have a chance to dig into that. Like, get curious, right? And it could be that they're mean because they call me a butt face. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not nice.
It can still hurt. Yeah.
Really. But it gives you a perspective of what is the actual issue instead of blowing it off and or saying, oh, kids just say people are mean all the time.
Right. Or saying like, or God forbid, like, oh, that's because they like you. They're teasing you because they like you. Yes. Like that whole thing. Oh, so problematic. Yeah. Right. Or when your kid doesn't want to go over to someone's house versus like forcing them to do it. Or if they don't want them to be if they don't want to be around someone versus like, oh, they're your so-and-so, right. Like digging into that.
And saying like, okay, if this is a relationship that our family has that you think is important, like I'm going to make sure I'm always there with the kid there are different ways we can approach helping our children navigate. Because if someone just isn't emotionally kind to your child, and that's the same, it's still an abusive feeling that the child is getting, or, so I think the more we can listen to our children and get curious and then
believe them.
And believe them.
Well, I'm curious, like, gosh, you had such terrible messaging about like God and purity and, coming before God clean, and like all those terrible references. Like, I would not be surprised if you ran away running and screaming from any notion of God that would judge you for something so beyond your control. But how has your trauma impacted your faith? Have you been able to integrate, faith into your healing? And, what does that look like?
I had a lot of people pouring into me positive, healthy messages about God and spirituality too. And a lot of really great adults, like your mom and dad were those adults. Like, I mean, one thing I wrestle, like, how do you believe Jesus loves you? The song, Jesus Loves Me, when somebody's hurting you. Yeah. Like, there's just a lot of contradiction, but I just gave a sermon at my church where I share about my very first memory of an encounter with God. And I was like 6, and it was with bunnies, Mariah.
Hey, love it.
You're going to have to listen to my sermon so that you can hear my story. But I also, when I was writing that and I was kind of putting that into light, I was like, oh my gosh, this encounter with God, the Holy Spirit, this answer to a prayer it was really concrete. It was like in the same age range as this abuse starting. And so now in this place of like investigation or looking, then you think like, well, was that God showing me that he was in it with me? Like God in it, God with me. Yeah. So I think that I feel like there were just some really convoluted messaging or messages. And also I can distinctly think about Jesus with me or God with me through really
you weren't
tough
alone.
things. And I was rescued. I mean, the abuse ended. Like, I mean, that's a rescue, right? It did stop somewhere in there, and
even if it hadn't stopped, God would still have been with you.
Right. Which is like, that's what gets really hard, right? Like, what the hell?
Right. Because then why wouldn't God stop it? Yeah.
Right. But then, I think that's like, that's the mystery that I don't quite get.
Right. It gets into like, why do bad things happen? Bad things, why do bad things happen? Why doesn't God stop the bad things? And there are no good answers for that. And I think it's absolutely understandable if you're like, okay, then I don't want to believe in a God that wouldn't stop that. Like, I think that it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree.
And my only thing that I go to is what you were saying, is that in it all, like thinking about like Jesus, I didn't mean to laugh there, but I was just thinking about like God goes to the depths, goes to the darkest places, and is there. God is in the pit. God is on the cross. And you are not alone, which for some, like, that's not good enough. And that's okay. That's understandable.
Yeah. And I think one thing that was helpful to me was just, the idea that Jesus weeps with us was very helpful to me. That he was
that Jesus
like,
what? Oh, weeps with you. Okay.
Yeah, that like he feels equally as devastated by the harm that is done to us as we do. But he longs for us not to feel hurt.
Yeah.
I think the biggest shift happened. So I was blessed to have some therapists who could do EMDR, and that is not the right fit for some people with complex trauma. It worked for me. But I had a separating of my mom and I's experience in the womb through that work, which is, I mean, I'm like, that is God to me, that God would allow that would separate. So when we're talking
Can you quickly explain what EMDR is? I don't know that we've talked about it before on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a therapy, eye movement desensitization rapid something. I'll try and find you a good article.
We can put a link.
It basically is a way to help your brain process and integrate the trauma that your brainstem is storing. So when something big or something that's ongoing, it gets stored without like a time and date stamp. And so that's why other things will make it come into your face and you'll feel like you're in it again because it hasn't been integrated. It doesn't have like a file place to go in your brain where you can like withdraw it as needed. It's like there. So like literally probably 4 years ago, I could not have had this conversation with you. Like our first sentence, it would have sent me into that and I would have been so dysregulated. I would have maybe talked to you, but I would have had no recollection of anything I said.
Sorry.
Bless you. So I think so it's a therapy. It's like highly effective for treating post-traumatic stress disorder with single event things. I think it is the things that are like so integrated that it's less, which is interesting because I went in thinking I was going to be addressing the sexual abuse, which probably has much more complicated intertwinings. But what ended up happening was that the EMDR helped me navigate the death of my sister and the like intertwining with my mom, which happened over several years and other events in between. So there was like a lot that took place. And I also was able to do neurofeedback therapy, which does have like a 95% effectiveness rate for reducing PTSD symptoms. So it's like super. And I would say I did that therapy before I did my second round of EMDR, which was where that separation happened. So I feel really lucky that it's not available everywhere, but I was able to have that. So
yeah, I have done some EMDR work and found it incredibly helpful and insightful. So Adi, in all of this, what would you say if someone said that you were a bad Christian because of your experience with trauma or your ability to share about it?
Well, I think I would say that I spent a lot of my life thinking that I was bad, and it wasn't helpful. And it wasn't a gift or a legacy I would ever want to pass to someone else. And I would ask them to think about the stones they're throwing, I think. Because my hunch would be that they have their own shame and rocks that they're carrying around. And I would just hope that they could do that. But and then I would hold that battery and walk away.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not bad. I am a person who was really hurt, and I did what I could to survive, and I caused hurt too. And so I've done what I can to repair. Continue. I think that some of the work I get to do in this is working toward repair in this world where people hurt each other. I'm just kind of anti-qualifier anymore. Like we're humans and we have behaviors, and it's not good and it's not bad. It just is.
Yep, it is what it is. My spiritual director has this saying, and it's, you are who you are, who you are, who you are. And then you can also apply it to others. They are who they are, who they are, who they are. It is what it is, what it is, what it is.
I love that.
So do you have any final advice for anyone who may be going through their own journey of healing for trauma? And we can put resources and stuff in the description also.
Yeah, I think the only thing I really ever want to remind people is that they're not alone and they don't have to do this work alone. Yeah. There are incredible professionals. And I also want to encourage people to find the right fit. I interviewed counselor Rachel Hunt Elmore on my podcast, and I loved what she said. She said,
sorry.
No, you're good. She just said that the best thing you can feel about your fit, besides wanting to make sure someone might be a trauma-informed therapist, but people say all kinds of things that you need to kind of weed through anyway. But it's like, do they care about you? Do you feel cared about in that relationship? And I think that if you have a pastor that you feel confident and cared about, start with them and ask them for resources so that you have a starting point. I just think so many people are afraid, and I was one of those people so afraid just to make the call. Just make the call. People will sit with you to make the call if you ask them, right? So it's okay to receive help. In all of the steps. Like no step is too tiny to ask for someone to sit with you as you take that.
Yeah. Well, Adi, would it be okay if I bless you and all of our baddies listening and watching this episode?
Yes, please. Bless me, girl. Bless me.
I will bless you. Adi and all of you beautiful baddies out there, may you go from this episode knowing that you are not alone, that all you have been through is seen and held by the divine. You are covered in grace and healing and wholeness, and may you seek out that integration and healing from the source, whatever that looks like. And may you know that even if you have been told that you are bad, you are good and beautiful, no matter what you have been through. Amen.
Amen. Amen. You are good and worthy and wanted.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Adi,
Thanks.
for coming on.
That's all for this episode of Called to Be Bad. Keep being your bad, beautiful selves, and I will see you next time.